Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Botanix Pharmaceuticals shareholder update webinar this morning. Joining us today is President and Executive Chairman Vince Ippolito, Executive Director Matt Callahan, Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Patricia Walker, and Chief Commercial Officer Howie McKibbon. Before we hand over to Botanix, please be advised that you are all in listen-only mode, and if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. I would also like to remind you that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the website following its completion. I will now hand over to Vince to begin his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Yes, I'm Vince Ippolito, and the President and Executive Chairman at Botanix, and I'm very pleased to be presenting here today. Well, today's a very exciting day for Botanix, as overnight, we've closed a transaction to acquire a new dermatology asset, which we believe accelerates the company towards revenue generation and nicely complements and augments our existing pipeline. You have probably seen the release this morning. The asset is called Sofpironium Bromide, and my colleagues and I look forward to walking you through the presentation and taking questions at the end. The full presentation was released this morning, so we'll be presenting most of the subset of those slides in the interest of time. Please post any questions that you have in the Q&A section and direct it to our moderator, and we'll try to get to many of them as possible. So why don't we get started with the next slide? First, a quick summary of the product that we've acquired and some of the elements that attracted us to this unique opportunity. Sofpironium Bromide is a new chemical entity that has been developed for primary axillary hyperhidrosis, which is a medical condition that results in excessive underarm sweating, which goes beyond what is normally required to keep the body cool. The product was developed by a US company, Brickell Biotech, and they announced positive phase 3 data, which met co-primary and secondary endpoints last year, and was found in those studies, as well as the long-term safety studies, to have a favorable safety profile. Given the circumstances, Botanix was able to negotiate very attractive terms to acquire Sofpironium Bromide with only $3 million upfront, and the balance of payment depended upon successful filing for FDA approval, other regulatory milestones, and sales successes. We are particularly pleased that the majority of the financial terms are back-ended, so we will not be burning a lot of cash acquiring or finalizing the approval of the asset. Many here on the call may not be familiar with hyperhidrosis, although we're all familiar with sweating, but more than 15 million people in the US alone suffer from this condition, and it represents a significant market opportunity, with the market for treatment worth approximately $1.6 billion today. As we'll talk about, the condition comes with significant mental and social challenges, to the point where more than half of the patients would pay almost anything to get rid of their excessive sweating. Finally, this asset has already been approved by the Japanese FDA. So, along with the excellent clinical data and how close to FDA filing it is, this de-risks the asset for us and makes it a very attractive acquisition. Let me hand it over to Matt so he'll walk us through the deal terms and get a better understanding. Matt?
Thanks, Vince. So obviously one of our key goals in approaching the acquisition, just over on slide 3, thanks, Charlie. One of our key goals was to minimize the cash that we had to outlay for the asset, and to ensure that to the extent possible, most of the money that we paid out was reflective of revenue that was coming in at the time. So from an outcomes perspective, you've seen from these terms that we've been able to achieve that. So we've a modest upfront payment of $3 million, a further $2 million that's payable in the event that the FDA confirms that the file itself is acceptable for review. There's a couple of approval milestones. One, obviously, on approval from the FDA. That's the one that we're most focused on. If we do proceed to develop the product into another indication or into another geographic location like the EU or the UK, then there is another milestone that's payable in that regard. Probably most importantly, as Vince mentioned, really the financial terms of this are very back-ended. So We have some sales milestones that we will pay to Brickell once we have net sales that exceed $75 million a year. And all of those sales milestones are capped at $160 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but that really implies that we have generated about $1.8 billion in net sales if we're paying all those milestones. So the royalties we've announced today range between 12 and 20%. The highest level, obviously, is payable only if we exceed $500 million of net sales in a year. And as Vince mentioned, this product has already been approved by the Japanese FDA. And we have a partner who's currently commercializing the product in Japan, known as Callahan Pharmaceuticals. And we're also entitled to 25% of the sales milestones and royalties that are generated from that partner as well. So all in all, a very attractive deal. It's not using our very precious cash, and we share the benefit and the outcomes from the success of this product with the person that sold it to us, or the company that sold it to us, only in the event of success. So very happy. Vince, back to you.
Thanks, Matt. Let's go to the next slide then. Well, at Botanix, we're very proud of our world-class board and management team, but given the fair amount of information we've got to get through this morning, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the people slide, but I do want to point out the recent appointments of Dr. Patty Walker and Howie McKibbon, who are joining us on the call today, and you're going to hear from them in the presentation today. So we're very pleased to have them both. So by way of introduction, Patty is a highly respected dermatologist who's worked in the industry for more than 30 years on well-known products like Botox. But most importantly, she was the president and the head of R&D at Brickell, where we acquired this product from. And she was responsible for the development of Sofpironium Bromide all the way up to the phase 3 study. So Patty, it's such a pleasure to have you at Botanix, and we're all looking forward to your presentation. Howie McKibbon joins us at Botanix after spending some time consulting to the company, and will be leading the commercialization of Sofpironium Bromide. He has worked with me previously at companies like Dermavant, Anacor, and Medicis, and has a tremendous track record of launching and growing dermatology products in the US and other international markets. You're also going to hear from Howie today on the presentation about the market opportunity here. So Howie, welcome. Let's go to the next slide. So before I jump into talking about hyperhidrosis and Sofpironium Bromide, I want to quickly make a couple of comments on how this acquisition fits into our pipeline and reinforces our commitment that we have to the existing CBD programs that are approaching multiple data readouts in the coming months. We look at this acquisition as a way of accelerating Botanix towards revenue generation a good couple of years ahead of what was planned with the pipeline, and a perfect fit for our commercial team to get into the game, both building an infrastructure that we would need anyways, but also generating cash sooner for Botanix. As you look at the pipeline, once Sofpironium Bromide is approved, we plan to have a pivotal study or potential approval every 24 to 36 months afterwards, which would be the envy of most dermatology companies today, given the breadth and market opportunity of the indications that we're targeting here at Botanix. So this acquisition really is transformative for the company, and I'm really excited to walk you through the explanation of the condition, the excellent data to support Sofpironium Bromide efficacy, the safety, and the market opportunity we plan to address in the upcoming months ahead. Next slide, please. So why don't we just jump right into it here? Next slide, and talk about hyperhidrosis. So sweating plays a vital role. However, extreme sweating, also called hyperhidrosis, is a condition resulting from sweating beyond the required level. The increased rate of sweating is not caused by external stimuli or temperature changes. It's caused by an overstimulation of the nervous system, which targeted drugs can address. More than 15 million people suffer from hyperhidrosis in the US alone. It usually begins at childhood or adolescence, with more than 75% of patients reporting a negative impact on social interactions and their mental health. Axillary, or underarm, is the most prevalent form of hyperhidrosis, which accounts for about 10 million of those 15 million sufferers I spoke of. And here's the interesting fact. 90% of axillary sufferers also have hyperhidrosis, in other areas of their body, like their face, their neck, their back, their chest, their hands, their feet. So these people can suffer in multiple areas. Next slide. One of the key challenges for hyperhidrosis patients is just not the fact that they sweat extensively, but the implications that the sweating has on their social, their work, and intimate relationships that they have. More than 3/4 of patients suffer mentally and physically from the consequences of hyperhidrosis, and they are forced to adopt a range of strategies to cope or hide the conditions, ranging from carrying an extra change of clothes, avoiding social interactions altogether, or not wearing certain colors or styles of clothes that they may enjoy to wear. Next slide. So as we look a little bit closer into that 15 million Americans with hyperhidrosis, you see from this slide, only about half actually seek medical advice. So first, you have a large market opportunity for sufferers of hyperhidrosis that don't know treatments are available. But those who seek medical advice, the vast majority of them go undiagnosed or untreated as well. So that even leaves a bigger opportunity to introduce a new treatment option for those patients that are already in doctor's office, actively seeking treatment for the disease. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now you got the disease. You're looking for a treatment option. Well, of those patients who have tried treatment options, they're not great. Many patients start with over-the-counter or clinical strength antiperspirants, which contain aluminum chloride. These products can lack efficacy and cause burning and stinging. But since they're widely available, this is where people start. Patients then generally progress to the older or reformulated oral or topical agents, which can have high rates of systemic side effects, such as dry mouth, dizziness, or blurred vision. Advanced patients might try Botox injections, which can be painful, or undergo surgery to actually cut the nerves that trigger excessive sweating to try to get some relief from their hyperhidrosis, which can also be very painful and comes with surgical risks. Next slide. As a result, there's a significant opportunity for a new topical agent which has class-leading efficacy and safety, which can provide a new approach to treatment of underarm hyperhidrosis and potentially displace the less effective or painful products, but also grow the overall market opportunity in this segment. The attractive thing about this patient population is that they are very highly motivated. As I mentioned in the introduction, most of these patients would pay almost anything for a treatment to stop their excessive sweating. Next slide. So why don't we just jump into the data here? And Patty, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you to take us through the data.
Thank you, Vince. So Sofpironium Bromide is a product that I know very well. As Vince mentioned, I had the good fortune to lead the team who designed and executed the non-clinical and clinical programs, including the phase 3 study design. So as you might expect, I'm very pleased and very proud to share the data which supports the safety and efficacy of Sofpironium Bromide for the treatment of axillary hyperhidrosis. So let's jump into this slide where we look at what is the mechanism of action. And it's illustrated here. First, you apply the gel to the skin where the Sofpironium Bromide binds to the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor, which is abbreviated as the M3AC receptor. Binding to this receptor blocks the sweating signal at the sweat gland. It thereby reduces the sweat. Any drug which is not bind to this receptor is quickly broken down to a less active metabolite in the blood. This less active metabolite then is quickly cleared from the body. In fact, the half-life is only 4 to 7 hours, and it's not measurable by 24 hours. This rapid metabolism and excretion allow for increased efficacy without the increased anticholinergic side effects. Next slide. The phase 3 study design is shown in this. The phase 3 pivotal study highlights 85% of the subjects had a clinically meaningful greater than 1 point change in the patient-reported outcome. 55% of the patients met a more rigorous 2-point change. Over 60% of the patients had both a 50% or greater reduction in the sweat production and a clinically meaningful 1-grade change. The average reduction in sweat was 138 milligrams. This study met all the endpoints, the primary and secondary endpoints. Next. The study design for the phase 3 study is shown in this slide. In this study, there were 2 identical placebo-controlled randomized phase 3 studies, the Cardigan 1 and 2 studies. Just over 700 subjects were enrolled and randomized 1-to-1 between the Sofpironium Bromide and placebo, approximately 350 subjects in each study. The treatment period was 6 weeks with a 2-week follow-up. The co-primary endpoints were a 2-grade change in the patient-reported HDSM axillary and a change in the gravimetric sweat reduction from baseline to the end of treatment. The HDSM axillary is a validated patient-reported endpoint that measures hyperhidrosis severity. We developed this endpoint by talking to real people with hyperhidrosis. We found out what was important to them and how they would define success. Those factors are what created this endpoint. Thus, it is highly clinically meaningful. The secondary endpoints are also outlined in this slide, but due to time considerations, I'm only going to focus on the key first secondary endpoint in this presentation. Next slide. Both co-primary endpoints achieved statistically significance in both phase 3 trials. For simplicity of the presentation, we have pooled the data from both phase 2 studies, the Cardigan 1 and Cardigan 2. The graph on the left demonstrates that 60% of the subjects in the treatment group achieved a highly statistically significance, showing a 2-point or greater change or improvement in their HDSM axillary. The p-value for this endpoint was 0.0001. That is highly significant. Similarly, the graph shown to your right shows the highly statistically significant mean reduction in the gravimetric sweat production in the Sofpironium Bromide treated arm. The mean reduction for the treatment group was 138 milligrams. Again, the p-value was highly significant at 0.0002. Next slide. We're also pleased to report that the key secondary endpoint demonstrated that nearly 85% of the patients achieved a statistically significant and clinically meaningful 1-point change in the HDSM axillary. The p-value for this change was 0.0002. I mention these p-values because they're actually simply astounding, or outstanding, I should say. It also bears repeating that the co-primary, all the secondary endpoints in both trials met statistical significance. This demonstrates that both the patients feel better and they produce less sweat as measured during the treatment period. Next slide. Also, it's worth bearing in mind the safety of this study has been demonstrated, or these studies have demonstrated that across multiple studies, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 programs in the US and in Japan, also including a long-term 48-week safety study in over 2,000 patients, that the drug Sofpironium Bromide was well tolerated. The majority of the adverse events were transient. They were mild and moderate in severity. And this is really supported by the fact that there was a very low dropout rate in the phase 3 trials. That concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention. I'm going to turn it over to Howie, who will walk you through the marketing opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. Great data. We're very excited. I want to take a few moments to talk about the commercial opportunity. I also highlight our partnership in Japan with Callahan, which we believe is going to help us de-risk this opportunity. Next slide, please. So as Vince outlined, hyperhidrosis is a very large market and has a solid growth rate expected to hit $2.8 billion in 2030. Now, currently, medications make up about 1.4 billion of that market, which is very good for us. And we know that they're currently made up of antiperspirants, which can have limited efficacy, and older drugs or reformulated drugs that can have undesirable side effects. So our goal here is not only to take share from an already large market, but to grow the market further from the vast majority of patients who suffer untreated. Next slide. In addition to the large existing market, which still leaves the majority of patients and a large remaining untreated population, I want to touch upon a third additional opportunity, which are additional indications. I want to highlight that 90% of axillary sufferers also have hyperhidrosis in another area of the body. And these areas represent new indication and expansion opportunities for us. So we see an opportunity here also to leverage our Permatrex platform to achieve better penetration in hard to treat areas, such as the hands and feet, and other areas of the body. And also bring some new innovation in the form of applicators once our initial product is FDA approved. Next slide. Now, before I go back to Vince for a summary and next steps, I want to comment on our Japanese partnership for Sofpironium Bromide. We're very pleased to work with Callahan Pharmaceuticals in Japan, who have been part of the development program and recently secured Japanese FDA approval for the 5% version of Sofpironium Bromide in late 2020. And though they're early in the commercialization process, we believe that the regulatory approval and their initial sales experience is going to help us de-risk our approval pathway and provide important insights as we commercialize the product. We also see opportunities to collaborate and expand further for future indications, formulations, and applications for the product. Vince, over to you.
I think you're on mute, Vince.
Thank you. My apologies. In the combination with the many near-term milestones we have in our current CBD clinical platform, the pathway for Sofpironium Bromide will be very fast-paced. As mentioned earlier, we plan to file with the FDA in the second half of this year. With normal timing from the agency, we'll have our mid-cycle review in the first half of 2023 and potential FDA approval in the second half, with commercialization shortly thereafter. Next slide. Well, in summary, I hope you're as excited about Sofpironium Bromide as we are here at Botanix. If approved, it will be the first and only new chemical entity to treat axillary hyperhidrosis. The phase 3 data was positive with statistical significance on all endpoints with favorable long-term safety, as Patty pointed out. This is a massive opportunity with 15 million patients in the US alone and projected to grow revenue to $2.8 billion by 2030. We're also very fortunate to have a leading Japanese partner with Callahan, as Howie's pointed out, who's de-risked many of the launch action steps for us already, and even more fortunate to have such an experienced team at Botanix ready to execute on Sofpironium Bromide. I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today and encourage you to learn more about Botanix by visiting our website. I'll now turn it back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. And that now concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. We will now begin the Q&A session. And I'd like to remind you that if you do have a question, please use the written Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will endeavour to answer as many as possible, but if we are unable to answer your question on the webinar today, please do send us an email and we will come back to you. I will now hand over to Vince to moderate the questions.
Thanks. Actually, I'm going to do that, Haley. So we've got a bunch of questions coming through here. I'm just going to try and group them together where I can. First couple of questions from Andrew and Ian, respectively. The first of those refers to other indications that may be approved by regulatory authorities. And then the question, what other settings or indications do we see sofpironium bromide used for? Maybe I can throw that question to Patty, just to kind of talk a little bit about plantar and palmar hyperhidrosis, and then I'll follow up potentially at the end of that with a couple of comments in response to Ian's follow-on question.
Thank you. It's easy to envision, considering that close to 90% of patients with axillary hyperhidrosis have sweating in other areas. So it is ripe for approvals. I think that, combined with the platform technology, the Permatrex, I hope I said that right, that Botanix has to increase penetration of the drug for thicker skin, such as the palms and soles, is very, very promising.
Thanks, Patty. So that actually answered a question from Ian, which was around reformulation. There's a follow-on question here in terms of other studies that may be required. Maybe I'll quickly talk to that one. So the benefit of having approval from FDA for phase 3 studies are that you can leverage a lot of that data in different indications. Certainly the safety data based on a similar exposure potentially, as well as some of the efficacy data to inform designs of studies. So they'd probably generally be done as what they call phase 4 studies, where we would do smaller studies, very focused on the indication, and hopefully move them reasonably quickly through to approval. So another question here from Mark, and maybe I'll throw this one to Vince. The question is, why did Brickell choose Botanix as a partner?
Yeah, so I've known the Brickell team for a very long time. I've interacted with them several years ago. Matter of fact, when they first started developing Sofpironium Bromide is when I started interfacing with the company. They're an excellent development house, and now have proven they're a very, very strong clinical house as well. With the outcome of these steady data in hand, they've proven them to do that. So the company, Brickell, made a public statement several months back that they were going to be looking for a partner to launch this asset. So you can imagine when we reached out to them upon learning about their desire to partner this particular asset, they were thrilled that we called because of the track record of success that the team has had over the past. This team here at Botanix combined has developed and launched over 30 assets in the dermatology space. So we're very excited that we were able to acquire this product for them, and even more excited today that we have Callahan, one of the leading pharmaceutical companies in Japan, also as our partner there.
Thanks, Vince. Question from Bill here. Essentially, how is Sofpironium Bromide different than the current products that are out there to treat hyperhidrosis? So maybe Patty, if you don't mind taking that one.
Yes, so it's certainly different than an injectable or surgery, right? In that it doesn't require a surgical procedure, and it's doesn't require a botulinum toxin, right? Botox, which is approved. That is a very small segment of the population that gets it, and it's essentially not reimbursed. Then you have devices such as Miradry, which is a destruction of the sweat glands, and it's very painful. On the other end, I don't know if you remember the slide that Vince had shown with where the market opportunity was. On the other far end, you have antiperspirants. When you get a highly concentrated antiperspirant, they really don't work that well. They're a physical blocker. They don't work well, and they're very irritating to the skin. So now your options are anticholinergic agents, such as Qbrexza, right? Qbrexza is glycopyrrolate. It binds similarly to that MC3 receptor, that acetylcholine receptor on the sweat gland. The difference is that the half-life of that drug is over 24 hours. It stays in the body a long time, it builds up, and patients get really, if overdosed, right, or get too much, they get intolerable side effects, anticholinergic side effects. So Sofpironium Bromide is unique in that it has the same or similar mechanism of action, binds to the same receptor. But when it's absorbed through the skin, it's very quickly broken down to a less active metabolite and very quickly then excreted. It's not even measurable at the end of 24 hours. So that allows the drug dosing to be increased and the side effects being decreased or more manageable. So that's really what's unique and I think most powerful about this drug.
Thanks, Patty. And maybe just a follow-on question here from James and William, kind of hitting on the same point here, which was in relation to the phase 3 studies, were you surprised at how well Sofpironium Bromide worked? And maybe you want to talk about kind of what was proposed, what was kind of the outcome, I guess, on those secondary endpoints. Maybe we go back to slide 20, I think it is, on the secondary endpoints, Haley, if you don't mind, in terms of the level of the clinical benefit that was seen. Yeah, thanks. This one here.
So surprised? No, because Burkle did 2 phase 2 studies, a phase 2A and a phase 2B. And if you design a study using the endpoints you plan to take into phase 3, you should be able to power a study to give you this kind of data. And that was all done. And then it was really good execution. Now, some of the execution was done during COVID, which made it a little bit trickier, but really everything worked. So there was a 1 grade change that you see as statistically significant. The 1 grade change and that patient reported outcome measure is clinically meaningful. So that's part of the validation of that response. But a more rigorous 2-point change was also meaningful. And there was a reduction in sweat. The key secondary endpoints were what happens if you look at the 2-point change and at least 70% reduction in the same person. So that's a more rigorous endpoint, and that was also statistically significant. If you went to the 1-point change and at least a 50% reduction in sweat, that was also statistically significant. And those p-values were 0.0001. So the drug works. It worked with a rigorous 2-point change. It worked with a mean sweat reduction. It worked with a 1-point change. And then in the same person, they achieved both patients feeling better and an objective measurable reduction of their sweat. So I'm personally not surprised, but I'm pleased because that's how the study was designed from the get-go.
I think it just means you're really clever. So a couple of other questions here from Ian, if I'm saying that correctly. The question is around, is Sofpironium Bromide approved anywhere else in the world? So I think we've talked about Japan, but maybe Howie, do you want to talk to that specifically in terms of that approval and maybe some plans for the company?
Yeah, sure, Matt. So our partner Callahan, as we said, it's a leading Japanese pharma company. They secured Japanese FDA approval in late 2020 and commenced commercializing, soon after that. So we think this not only helps de-risk the approval process for the FDA because they've gone through, the process of having to put together that package, and it's a fairly rigorous review process there. It also advises a number of the critical pre-launch activities for Botanix that we'll be preparing for in any event. So I think anytime we have more information with regard to how consumers react to your product and how physicians react to your product, it's always going to be helpful. I think that at the end of the day, it provides information, it provides a pathway, but it provides a partner that can help us in a lot of ways in the future with regard to additional indications, the know-how to create a potential new applicator, and many other things. So we're happy to have them, and we're excited to keep working with them.
Great, thanks, Howie. Question here from Michelle, which is around the the scale that's used, this HDSMAX scale, and maybe this one's for Patty as well. Do you want to try and explain, Patty, kind of why that scale is new and kind of why it was used and kind of how we know that it's relevant, I guess, to a clinical outcome?
Okay, thank you. So the FDA required Brickell and they required Demerit to create clinically meaningful patient-reported outcome measure for this disease. So there's an old measure that you'll see in the literature if you were to look called the HDS, the Hyperhidrosis Disease Severity Scale. That scale is not considered valid because it mixes how a patient feels and what their sweating is like in one response. So what we did is go back to the drawing board. We interviewed many patients with hyperhidrosis that rated themselves as severe and that they had the disease, and asked them what bothered them about the disease. That resulted in 7 key features that unanimously across patients interviewed with the disease that they thought were important. And the patients rated this from not experiencing these side effects or these features from none of the time to all of the time, or they didn't experience it to very severe. And they're questions like damp or wet clothing caused by your underarm sweating, underarm sweating for no apparent reason, excessive sweating when you're nervous, stressed, or anxious, because these are the things that these patients said they experienced with their disease. Damp clothing, sweating with little or no physical activity, underarm wetness, and underarm sweating for no reason. So the HDSM axillary is 7 questions that the patient rates, and then those questions create a score, and they had to move that score 2 points. So it's a 5-point scale. If you add all the questions together and divide by 7. I don't want to get too complicated, but it is like a 5-point scale. Then you had to move 2 points down, and to get in the trial, you had to be a 3 or 4 on a 0 to 4 point scale.
Got it. Thank you.
I hope that wasn't too out there.
That's great. Thank you. Question from James here. Maybe Vince, if you want to take this one. What are the next steps with Sofpironium Bromide?
Yeah, so you can imagine, James, this is a very busy time at Botanix as it's all hands on deck for the FDA approval filing, which we mentioned will be done in the back half of this year. So with that filing in place, given normal FDA timing, you can imagine sometime late 2023, potential approval in hand. It's the next year is all going to be about getting this approved, interacting with the agency, and beginning our commercialization efforts and build up at our company. And, you know, frankly, we were going to need to do this anyways for our existing pipeline. So this gives us a great jump start on building the company and getting ready for commercialization with Sofpironium Bromide.
Thanks, Vince. And maybe just to follow on to that from Kevin, do you want to talk about the Botanix cash position and what this transaction means for the cash position itself?
Yeah. So currently we've got $16 million on hand at the company. So we're in a good cash position. So that's enough cash to fund and close the Sofpironium Bromide deal as we've done, take us all the way through approval with Sofpironium Bromide. It's enough cash to complete the current clinical platform that we have, the dermatology and antimicrobial platform that we have ongoing right now at the company, and just normal operating expenses for the company. So in short, we do not need to raise cash for the close of this acquisition. Now, as we approach the approval and commercialization of Sofpironium Bromide, then we'll evaluate what other options the company has available to them in the best interest of the company and the shareholders.
Great, thanks, Vince. Another question here from James, which is, can we expect more members to join the Botanix team in the near future due to this drug and the other assets in the portfolio? So maybe, Vince, do you want to take that one in terms of, I guess, the network of folks that we seem to be bringing in from your former companies to kind of assist with commercialization of these products?
Yeah. So we've run extremely lean at the company here, and we will continue to run lean at the company. But right now, it's about identifying the key hires over the next 12 to 18 months that we need on board to prepare for the launch, the commercialization of Sofpironium Bromide. And, not to mention also that, we could spend a ton of time here talking about the current clinical platform we have in the CBD platform with our acne, rosacea, atopic dermatitis, dermatology assets, and our antimicrobial program as well, which parenthetically, I'm sure most of you saw, we received QIDP, which is Qualified Infectious Disease Program designation from the FDA, which gives us elevated status for this clinical program. So we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us. So right now, the company is stepping back and identifying those key employees that we need, first and foremost, for Sofpironium Bromide, and to be able to round out key hires also for the rest of our clinical program here. So we'll take it at a very measured and paced event, as none of us are strangers to the time that we're in right now in preparing for this commercialization of Sofpironium Bromide.
Great, thanks, Vince. And maybe the final question here from Maggie. We can maybe finish up on this one. What does this acquisition mean for the rest of the Botanix pipeline?
Yeah, Matt, we probably could have spent this much time on this webinar just talking about all that's going on right now in the current clinical platform with all the near-term milestones that are there. So as we're looking at both the rosacea ongoing trial and the atopic dermatitis, we're going to have data in hand in the back half of the year for both of those trials, which we're going to inform our acne trial, which is well advanced and phase 3 ready as well. The antimicrobial platform, as I just mentioned here, is ready to kick off this quarter with a new trial. So as you step back and you take a look at what we've got in the clinical platform, we've got Sofpironium Bromide, if approved. We'll be commercializing this asset shortly thereafter approval. But if you look at the timing of the current platform, with success of that clinical platform, those programs, and success with FDA approval, potentially we could have a new asset to launch here at Botanix every 24 to 36 months as those drugs roll through. It is absolutely the envy of any dermatology company to have not only a phase 3 asset going into the FDA for approval, but a pipeline or a stable of products that potentially can continue to fuel the growth of the company.
Thanks, Vince. Just conscious of time here, we're coming up on the quarter of the hour, so maybe we'll kind of pause the questions there. Thank you for everyone for the great questions, and thanks to the panel for answering those. Maybe Howie, back to you to wrap up and just to follow up with questions via the email and the website as we suggested.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. And on behalf of the entire Botanix team, we thank you for your ongoing support. If you did have a question that we haven't been able to answer today, please do email us. Our contact details are on the bottom of the ASX announcement released this morning. Again, thank you, everybody, and we look forward to updating you with our progress in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.